So tonight, Bezrat Hashem, we are learning Leilu Nishmat Avraham ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Avraham. Now, there was many questions that came that I've gotten, which sort of pushed me to do this topic a little bit earlier than I intended to it, just to clarify. And that is that we've been discussing this concept of Emunah and Bitachon, and really this concept of like Hashgacha Pratit. Think of it like divine providence, that God is overseeing everything. God is in control of everything, and God is manipulating everything. So when you're dealing with a situation where, let's say, I made a mistake. So now you have here that everything's from God, but on the other hand, I made a mistake. So when I make a mistake, is that from God or is that my fault? So it's a very, very important question. We're actually gonna delve into this question in a much deeper manner. But in order to understand this, there's a Gemara in Chulin, page 7b, that says that Amar Rabbi Chanina said, "En Adam nokefetz ba'o melamata." A person doesn't even bang his finger, like a finger from below. Ela im kein machizin alav melamala. Only if they decree it up above that he should bang his finger, then his finger will get hurt, or whatever the situation will be. So we have over here a concept that everything is from God. On the other hand, we have a very famous pasuk in Devarim, chapter 4, verse 15. You have to go and guard yourself. You have to be careful. So the question that you should ask and be like, wait a minute, why do I have to watch myself? Why do I have to guard myself if everything is from God? If everything's from God, I can do whatever I want. Doesn't matter. I could fly off a building. If I'm not supposed to die, I'm not supposed to die. If it's not all in God's hands, so then each sort of statement a little bit contradicts itself. So the problem here, that we can really break it up into three sections. Number one is this problem came from God. So if this problem came from God, then fine. Then we know everything that God does is for the best, and that's for the best. It's not in your control. When it's not in your control, that's directly from God. That's an easy way to go through Emunah and Bitachon. However, you have a category number two. And category number two is if, let's say, somebody else hurt you. So if somebody else hurt you, is that from God? Because this person has free will. And if this person has free will, so they could hurt me, as well. That's category number two. Category number three is when you hurt yourself and when you damage yourself. And when you damage yourself, when you're negligent, when you make a mistake, when you mess up, this could be in two different, sections, subcategories. You could physically, hurt yourself. By mean physically means in the physical world, meaning that, let's say you are negligent and you lost money. So now the question that you have to ask, did God want me to lose this money, or is it my own free will that I wasn't careful, and because of that, I lost my money? That's the physical aspect. The spiritual aspect is, God forbid, someone made a sin. And then they could say, did God want me to make the sin? Or did God not want me to make the sin? So you have here these two, the spiritual and the physical, that you have to deal with. So now, Bezrat Hashem, today, the focus that I want to do today is where you go and you are negligent and you hurt yourself. God will, and this is what I was telling you before we started, is that we split it up into two categories. So one category is going to be your own damage that you did, your own negligence that you did to yourself. Category number two, Bezrat Hashem, next week will be with somebody else was negligent or somebody else hurt you. Is that from divine providence? Is that Hashgacha Pratit? Is that from God? So today, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to be speaking about when you mess up yourself. Is that from God, or you're just messed up yourself and God had no intent of you losing the money? It was just because you aren't careful. So when you're dealing with the concept of you're having your own problems, you're making a mistake and you're losing out, you're suffering the cause by you, there's also another subcategories, two categories over here. And that is, one of them is that you did it on purpose. Some people purposely hurt themselves. And another category is that you did it by mistake. And both of those categories we want to discuss. So let's first discuss the category where you hurt yourself on purpose. And this, by the way, goes through so many different, angles, where people go and they wallow in their own misery and they cause themselves more suffering, where people go and they physically hurt themselves, they physically, give themselves pain. You have people where they go and they, put themselves in a situation that they want to get hurt. So let's deal with the purpose one first. There was a famous tzaddik by the name of Rabbi Yehoshua from Anapoli, and he was extremely, extremely poor, and he had to marry off his daughter. So he goes over to his rabbi, Rav Dov Ber, who's the Maggid of Mizrich, and he goes over to him and says, Rabbi, I need to marry off my daughter. So his rabbi goes, quickly gives, takes out, money, and he had 300 rubles on him, and he gives it to his pupil, which is also a rabbi in himself, Reb Zusha. And Reb Zusha takes this money, and he starts making his way back to his hometown to start making arrangements to marry off his daughter. As he's passing by this town, this particular town, he hears, this tiny, small little hut. There's the sound of like bitter crying coming from inside this little hut. And he goes over to the nearby people and says, what's going on with this house? What's going on with this hut? Is everything okay? And they're like, no, it's a terrible situation. It's a town that didn't have so much money. And there was a poor widow, and this poor widow saved up 300 rubles, and she went, and right before the chuppah, she lost all the money. And because she lost all the money, she was not able to go and continue with the wedding. She couldn't pay the bills. And she's sitting over there. The wedding is supposed to happen that day, and she can't go and she can't continue. So she's sitting over there. She can't marry off her daughter. She's sitting and crying. So Reb Zusha thinks for a second, and he says, 300 rubles. It's exactly what he had on him. He knocks on the door. This woman with drenched in tears opens up, and she's like, what can I help you? And he's like, I heard you lost 300 rubles. And she's like, yeah. And he's like, can you tell me, did it have any distinguishing marks on it? And she goes and she says, I had a certain amount of 10s, I had a certain amount of 20s, I had a certain amount of 50s. She gave him each of the denominations exactly how much I had, and it was tied around with a red string. And he's like, what? I found that money. And she's like, are you kidding me? Really? He's like, yeah. He's like, let me go back to the inn. As he's traveling through the towns, he stayed by certain inns. He's like, let me go back to the inn and bring you the money. He runs back to the inn. Now he had the money on him, but he runs back to the inn, and he goes to the inn, and he goes and he changes the money for the denominations that this woman said that she had, the widow that she had. So he goes and he changes it for the 50s, for the 10s, for the 20s exactly. He finds a red string, he ties it around, puts it in a bag, and goes back to this old woman, to this widow. He goes to this widow and he says, here's your money. And he gives her the money, and he says, by the way, I took 20 ruble. This is for my, finder's fee. This is for my troubles. That's my payment. And she's like, what? Are you kidding me? She's like, you're stealing from a poor widow? You're stealing from someone who has nothing? And he was adamant. He's like, I'm not budging. He says, this belongs to me. I earned it. After all, I found you. I gave you 280 rubles. Shouldn't you be happy? And she was screaming, how dare you? How can you do it? People started hearing it. People started gathering around. What are you doing to this widow? And when they find out that he doesn't want to return that last 20 rubles, they get so upset. It's just like, come on, she's a widow. She has nothing. Why do you got to do that? And he says, no, this is my reward. I'm not budging. They call the rabbi. The rabbi, hears both sides, and the rabbi issues a decree. You must go and you must give the widow the money. And he says, no, I'm not giving it. So there was a young man nearby. He put his hands into Reb Zusha's pocket. He pulled out the 20 ruble, and then he gave it to the widow. And then they went. The few people in town went, picked up Reb Zusha, and threw him out of town, like physically threw him out of town. And that was the end of that story. Many months go by, and the village rabbi encountered Rav Dov Ber of Mizrich, this Reb Zusha's Rebbe. And he goes over to him and says, it's a very interesting story that happened. There was a guy that traveled here by the name of Reb Zusha, and he traveled through town, and he gives him the whole story with the 300 ruble and the whole ordeal. And the Maggid over here goes and he hears the story. He says, you have to go right away, find Reb Zusha and beg him for forgiveness. And the rabbi says, what do I have to forgive him for? And the rabbi goes and says, I'm the one who gave Reb Zusha the money. I gave him 300 ruble. He didn't find that. I gave it to him so he could go and he could marry off his daughter. But he probably didn't want any honor. So he, to try to avoid it at all costs, he went and he rather been ashamed and kicked out of the village than get any honor for this mitzvah. So this rabbi went and traveled to Reb Zusha's home, and he begged him for forgiveness. He says, Rabbi, I didn't know what you did. I'm so sorry. Had I known, of course I wouldn't have, made a big deal about it. And the rabbi said, Reb Zusha says, no, you don't need my forgiveness. I was never angry with you. I did not hold my honor high. I don't have a grudge. But one thing, he says, I'll forgive you completely, but you have to promise never to reveal the truth to the widow. Never reveal to her that it was my money, it wasn't hers. So he said, fine, and they went their separate ways. A short while later, the Maggid, which is Reb Zusha's Rebbe, went over to him, and he, they met up, and he said, why did you do that? Why did you do it that way? So Reb Zusha goes and he says, I saw the poor orphan bride. I saw the poor widow, and my compassion was so overwhelming for them. I just wanted to give them the money. I wanted to do it right away. But as I was thinking that I'm going to give them the money, all of a sudden my evil inclination, my Yetzer Hara, goes and says, Zusha, you're going to be such a great tzaddik. Look at you. You're going to go and you're going to give it. There's going to be no one greater than you. Can you believe it? You went and you borrowed 300 rubles just for your daughter. You got it as a gift from your rabbi. And not only did you not go and marry off, you gave it to this poor widow. Like, how much of a righteous person are you? And the evil inclination kept on boosting up my ego. And I went to the evil inclination. I'll be like, oh, really? You want to mess with me? I will show you that I'm going to give them the money and they're going to kick me out. I'm going to get zero honor from it. So we see over here from the story something very interesting. First of all, a lesson that you have to learn from the story is how important it is to give people the benefit of the doubt. How many times does someone go and it appears as if they're hurting you? And really, what they're really doing behind the scenes is they're helping you out. They're really helping you out, and you just see it as a pain and as a suffering. The next time that, God forbid, something happens to you that's not the best, stop for a second. I think maybe there's more that lies in this situation. Maybe there's more. Maybe we should start giving people the benefit of the doubt. Look at this widow. If she would have known that Reb Zusha gave her out of his own pocket 280 rubles, you think she would have argued for the 20 rubles? You think she would have screamed at him? She would have been, singing his praises. So with that story, we have to think about it for a second. Reb Zusha, the question that we have to now ask here, he went through terrible suffering. He was physically thrown out of town. Did God decree him to be thrown out of town? Or did he bring that upon himself? And in fact, we see over here that there are many times that people bring suffering upon themselves. So let's put a general rule out there. Generally, a person should not bring suffering upon themselves. In our day and age, righteous people, different level. Where do we see that it's very, common when people go and then put suffering upon themselves? We know this is especially Al Pi Kabbalah. There is different tikkunim. There's different fasts. Let's say somebody goes and he's fasting 84 fasts for a certain sin that he did. So it wasn't decreed that he should go and he should not be able to eat food for the next 84 days, but rather he had a decree that he would have food. But now he's bringing the fast upon himself. He's bringing the suffering upon himself. This suffering is an atonement. It's a kapara. It's a tikkun that he's going through. So there is an aspect that you're able to go and you're able to bring suffering upon yourself, and that suffering is something that is a tikkun. It's actually for your benefit. But the general rule is we don't bring suffering upon ourselves. And if you are on a level that you're going and you want to do certain tikkunim, you want to bring certain suffering upon yourself for whatever reason, under the supervision of a competent rabbi, that may be appropriate and the rabbi will guide you in it. But generally speaking, we don't put suffering, we don't put more difficulties upon ourselves that we don't need to. Again, unless it's a tikkun, unless it's a kapara, unless it's certain things, and that's under the direction of the rabbi. So now, that's dealing when you're doing something for yourself on purpose. It's needless to say that you should not hurt yourself for no purpose whatsoever. Where people go and they just, physically go and they give themselves pain, or they go and they put themselves in a situation where they will be hurt, whether it's financially, emotionally, intellectually, or whatever the matter may be. And obviously, you're not supposed to be doing that. This is the only case where you can go and you could say that there might be some benefit and there is a way to do it, but that's again the direction of under the supervision of a rabbi, and how and what exactly to do. So that's dealing with on purpose. Now, the bulk of the discussion is really what happens when it's not on purpose, when it's a mistake. You're going about in your way. You want only the best for yourself, right? As everybody does. And, unfortunately, you do something over here, you do something over there, and you make a mistake, and because of that, you go through suffering, whether it's money, whether it's marriage, whatever the issue is. What is that? Is that from God, or is that your fault? So, I want to share with you something from Rabbi Avigdor Miller. So Rabbi Avigdor Miller speaks about suffering. We know that there's many functions for suffering, but if we could put it into two, we could put it into top two. Number one, you have a suffering could either be a tikkun, a kapara, like we spoke about, and then there's another aspect of suffering, and that is where you need to learn. God is sort of teaching you something. So the idea to understand this is a person has his own choice. You have your own free will. And if you go and you use your own, foolish behavior to go and do something bad, and because of that bad, you get hurt, don't go blaming God for that. That was your fault. If somebody goes and eats too much, and then they get unhealthy and they say, God wanted this to happen. No. You could bring this bad upon yourself. The Mesilat Yesharim goes and says that when a person is careless with his own safety, that very thing that he's careless with, that he's negligent with, that God will punish him. Why? In order to teach him. In order to teach him that he shouldn't go and do that. We know that the aspect of guarding your health is so important that if someone's sick, dangerous on Shabbat, and you're going through a dangerous situation on Shabbat, we mechalel Shabbat, we break Shabbat in order to save his life. Pekuach nefesh is the most important thing. But if, let's say, a person is careless, then God, says Rabbi Victor Miller, will cause a thing to happen to him in order to teach him not to be careless. So which means is, carelessness is not a matter of bitachon. It's a matter of understanding the ways of God. If there's a pandemic going around and you're not being careful, you can't say, I have emunah bitachon in God. No, that's being careless. That's something else. The Pasuk in Mishlei, chapter 19, verse 3, says, Ivelet Adam tisalef darko, ve'al Hashem yizaef libo. Meaning, the translation is, a man's own foolishness makes his way unfortunate. Like, he causes his own problems to himself. Yet what? He's angry at God. He causes problems to himself, and who's he angry? It's God's fault. It's always God's fault. And God says, wait a minute, why is it my fault? Why are you angry at me? It's your fault. You're the one who did this. You have a free will. If someone goes, drinks alcohol, goes and drives and gets pulled over, God forbid, get a car accident, don't start crying, why do bad things happen to good people? You brought this upon yourself. If someone goes and jumps off a roof because he wants to get a good recording, I'm saying like this, look how old I am. Now it's like this, you got to hold your phone, right? And it used to be like this. So he wants to go and get a good video, and he jumps and he falls down and he breaks his foot. You say, oh, God wanted me to break up. No, you're an idiot. You jump, who does that? Why are you doing that? And you're doing that so you could cause problems to yourself. Says Rabbi Victor Miller, when Yosef's brothers saw that the ruler of Mitzrayim wanted to go and make them slaves, you know what they said? They said, oh, Hashem has found our sin. God has found our sins. Meaning they were blaming God for their problems. But in truth, the Gemara says what happened to them was because Yosef was sold to Mitzrayim by their own hands. They themselves were part of that problem. They themselves caused that issue. So we see over here that you could bring yourself into a situation that wasn't initially intended for. And then we have to go and figure out, think about when, let's say, somebody puts himself in a situation, some people get into a situation that is so difficult that they can't get out. And the question that is often asked is, can somebody be tested beyond their means? The obvious explanation to the obvious, concept to this is suicide. Can somebody be brought to a situation where it's beyond their capability to cope with this, and they're led to depression, led to suicide, and it's not it's a test that they cannot pass. So, and this is something that Rabbi Victor Miller says. He goes and says that it's very possible. This is all I'm not saying this myself. I'm saying off of Rabbi Victor Miller. It's very possible that this person committed suicide on his own free will, or on her own free will. And he said that's a very big sin. He said in most cases happens to be they're sick. There's a chemical imbalance. They're emotionally sick. They're not healthy, and they're not necessarily bad people. There's an imbalance, and things that ended up happening. But he goes on and he says, Rabbi Victor Miller, that it's very possible that even then it may be the result of their misbehavior that brought them into a situation of no return. So in order to understand this, let's say someone goes and gets married, and this person goes and gets married, and he's used to living his life a certain way, and his wife is also used to living her life a certain way. But now what happens is when you put two people together, you have to learn how to get along with a different person. And let's say they don't want to learn how to get along. Each one is very stubborn in exactly the way that they want to. So what begins at a very small strain, eventually over time becomes a huge strain, and it could lead to a nervous breakdown or divorce, but whatever it is, it could lead to a nervous breakdown and be like, I can't deal with this anymore. That's why sometimes, you go and the people that, that literally can't cope, you see the wife, it's very cute. You see these old couples, right, in the supermarket, and the guy is, pushing the cart in the behind, and the woman is way up front, and he's like, Harold, go put some pineapple. And, you hear him mumbling on his breath. And it's like, she's telling me to put a pineapple. I'll tell her what to do. His coping method is he's talking to himself. He's coping himself. And you see this. It's cute. I mean, it's sad. It's a sad, cute thing. So if somebody doesn't learn how to get along, eventually what happens is the strain gets bigger and bigger until they snap. If they don't fix it, they snap. Somebody is accustomed to a high lifestyle, and they can't maintain it. God didn't give them that level of panasah yet. So they put a strain on their mind, and that could break on it. It could cause somebody to go and mentally break down. Now, who caused that? Was it God that caused that? Or was it the fact that you put yourself into a situation where you shouldn't have put yourself? The concept of health. We have to be very healthy. We have to eat healthy. We have to sleep enough. We have to, do at least a little bit of exercise to move around a little bit. When someone's careless of their health, it affects the mind, and the mind can, if you don't be careful, it could snap. You don't sleep for a few days, you're not functioning. You could snap. You have people that gamble. People, in every aspect in life, someone goes into whether it gambles, money, literally gambling, or gambles it in business in a not smart, safe way, and they go and they end up putting themselves to a point of no return, and they snap. Now, it's very possible that all this problem was caused by you. Wasn't intended. God didn't have it, intended plan for going and you having a certain situation where you put yourself into. So it says Rabbi Victor Miller, there's the point of here of understanding this is that there is possible that a great deal, this is the words of Rabbi Victor Miller, of mental illness can be a result of the person's own problem. Look how, it's a very scary thought. We have power. We have power of what we do. We have power on how we cope. And we have to really take this into consideration. So that being said, because we touch this, we have to ask a very important question. Being that a person has the ability to go and cause problems upon himself, we have to ask the question, can a person die before his time? Can a person die early? Now, let's say someone's intended to live 120 years. Can that person go and die at the age of 105? So the Gemara in Bava Kama, page 60b, speaks about that. When a plague comes into a certain town. So and this is also brought down. The Rama brings this down that if there's a plague that comes to town, so in the beginning of the plague, then what you should do is leave. But let's say the plague settles in and it's all over. It's like settled in. It didn't start yet. It's like settled in. Everybody's in lockdown. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to remain in the city. You don't run out, but you remain indoors. Ask the Rashbash, the son of the Tashbetz. He goes and asks a question. He says, how does it help if this person will go and run away? If there wasn't described in Rosh Hashanah that this person will die from this plague, let this guy run to Australia, let it run to Israel, let it run all over the world. It doesn't matter. If it was inscribed on Rosh Hashanah that he should die, then he will die. If it wasn't inscribed, let him go and walk straight through the plague. What's the difference? Nothing's going to happen to him. So the Rashbash answered that death is technically possible before their time. How? If somebody puts himself in a dangerous situation. If somebody doesn't take proper precaution, then they could result in, a early death. Now, I do need to, it was very difficult for me to try to figure out how to say it, and I hope and I pray to God that I can explain this the right way. People, if someone passed away, you don't go and think, okay, you know what? If I would have done this and if I would have done that, that's what should have happened. Generally speaking, as long as you did the regular hishtadlut, then you don't have to go and start worrying that, okay, maybe they died. If you did the basic ishtadlut, the normal thing that you need to do, that's it. It was that person's time. People go, especially after the coronavirus, oh, maybe if we didn't put him into the hospital, then he would have lived. Maybe if we did put him into the hospital, he would have lived. People are second guessing. You have to do the best response. I'm talking about cases right now. If you decide that you're going to go skydiving without a parachute and just an umbrella or whatever it is, and that's how it's going to save you. I'm talking about a place where you're putting yourself negligent. I don't want anybody, God forbid, to get from this and be like, you know what? If, there was a little boy that unfortunately ran into the street, got hit by a car. So maybe if the mother would have bought... No. In those situations, you don't blame yourself. You don't blame yourself. It was that person's time. I'm talking about the situation where somebody goes and puts himself in a negligent situation, that it's possible for someone to die early. I hope that this makes sense. The Ramchal in Mesilat Yesharim, the 9th chapter, goes, and he says that there is appropriate fear and there's foolish fear. So when one chooses not to be guided by wisdom and they expose themselves to dangers, that's not trust. That's not emunah. That's something called recklessness. That's something called stupidity. That's not what you should be doing. So there is a fine line between. It's actually a thick line. It's not so fine. It's pretty obvious. What you should do and what you shouldn't do. Don't put yourself in a situation. You'll be like, you know what? Let me go and wear the Israeli flag and walk into one of the Palestinian territories and be like Israel only. That's not a smart thing to do, right? You don't want to go and walk into Harlem and start preaching about whatever it is that you're going to be preaching from a, from a perspective, and be like, my holy brothers, and then say a bunch of things that they're not going to like, and be like, well, you know what, I got God on my side, so God will protect me. Like, don't do something that's suicidal and idiotic. So now that we have hopefully that concept fairly clearly, how do you deal with accepting, like, what do you deal with post that situation? So let's say somebody was negligent, and now what? Like, now, how do we go and try to understand it or deal with it or cope with that? So with that, we have to go back to what we spoke about last week with Yosef. Yosef, how did he cope with his situation? He went and he was sold by his own brothers to Arabs, and when he was going to be sold to his brother, he begged to his brothers, please help me, please don't do it. He pleaded desperately with his brothers. But once they sold him, once the deed was done already, you don't hear him complaining anymore. You don't hear, him have any misery, no protest. He accepted his fate. There was no signs that he was upset. So, and we explained last week, how do we know that he wasn't upset? The fact that he was able to smell the spices, the fact that he was able to go and comprehend that there's something good, that means that he must have been in a peaceful state. If somebody just suffered a loss or just suffered a severe, terrible situation, they're not going to be like, something smells nice over here. It doesn't even register. In order for you to register certain things, your senses you have to be calm. You have to be at a calm perspective, and then you could appreciate certain things, and you could, smell certain things. If you're going and you're, let's say, traveling on the road, and there's beautiful scenery, beautiful, and, when you're going, and if your mind is so preoccupied with troubles and problems, you're never going to see that. Even if you're sitting and looking at it, you're still not going to be able to appreciate it. But if you're calm and you're relaxed, then you're able to appreciate the surroundings. You're able to, your senses are opened up. So Yosef, if he was able to smell the smell of the spices that the Arabs were selling, that means that he was at a calm state. So meaning that, what was Yosef's way of coping it? That when he had ability to do something, he did it. He tried. He did his shtadlut. He did whatever it is that he could. He begged his brothers, please don't do this. The second that he did it, he's like, okay, this is from God. He had an acceptance upon it, that it was done, the deed was done, and it's interesting, the deed was done, and why was he sold? He was sold because of the way Yosef acted. It was his, way of acting that caused the brothers to go and sell it. So he could have been and be like, you know what? I shouldn't have said that way. Maybe I shouldn't have done this, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but no. He did whatever he could when he was able to do it. But the second that the deed was done, he's like, okay, this is what God wants, and this is what I accepted. And this is a very, very, very important concept, that we have to do our hishtadlut. We have to do our effort. That is all that is accepted. That is expected. I'm sorry. Now, this is very common also with marriages, where people go and get married, and they say, did I marry the right person? Maybe I married the wrong person. And it also works in the dating world. Maybe I should have married that person, before they're married yet. Oh, I should have said yes to this, I should have said yes to that. People feel like, oh, I could have married so many people already. So there is an aspect, yes, that you are able to lose a shidduch. There is an aspect that you could cause yourself. But generally speaking, you generally don't, as long as you're doing everything more or less normal. However, what about with the marriage? Let's say someone's in a marriage and be like, maybe I married the wrong person. The answer is that God is the one that orchestrates everything. God put you in a certain circumstances. God is mishadech zivugim. God is the one that's doing, and He's pointing all the dots together and setting you with you and putting all the pieces together. That's what God does all the time, constantly. Obviously, God is overseeing everything, but specifically, God is mishadech zivugim. God is making shidduchim. So if you got married to your spouse, just know that was the right person. That was the right person. You had a woman that went and asked this to a rabbi. So how do I know I married the right man? And the rabbi answered is that, you might think now you made a dumb decision and you made a decision that you shouldn't have done. But you should know that God put you in that circumstance, and He put you in a situation that you would say yes to your husband. There are certain people that, let's say, they date so long and, they just sort of like get married. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but if you got under the chuppah, you should know that you are supposed to go under the chuppah. And that's the thought process that you should have. You should not have any other thought process. After whatever, if God forbid something happens and people separate or divorce, things like that, whatever, deal with that in a separate situation. But the fact that you get married, that's what it should have been, and that's what it was intended that it should be. So people should be, confident that if you married someone, know that you married the right person. Now, it's a very important, aspect when someone goes and tries to do something and they're not successful and they feel, maybe if I would have tried harder, I would have been able to do it. Maybe if I would have done this, people, sort of live in the past. And it's besides the fact that it's unhealthy and you're not living in the future, you just keep on, focusing on the past. There is a reason why things didn't go your way. And I'm speaking in a situation where people did normal hishtadlut. There's an entire section in this series, B'ezrat Hashem, that will speak about hishtadlut. But when you're doing the normal hishtadlut, you don't have to worry about, should I have done this, should I have not. You don't live in the past. Now, the way that I like to explain it is that people go, and let's speak about it in dating. A girl is going and she wants to date this person. And she dates this person and it's a no-go. She wanted to go and continue, he said no. She dated another guy, said no. She dated another guy, said no. Dated another guy, said no. She's like, what's going on with it? God, please, what are you doing to me? He's like, come on, just give me one person, that's all I'm asking for. And what the way that she should really look at it is that it's a hallway. And each door is another guy, another date, or vice versa. If you're a guy, each door is another girl. And you're trying this door, and you're trying it, it's locked, it's not working. And then you go to another date, another person, and it's not working. Try to go another, not working. You're getting very frustrated. And you're saying, what's going on, God? Why are you not helping me? And the answer is, God is helping you. God is locking all these doors because those are not intended for you. Those are not your soulmates. Those are not your zivug. What happens is God directs you directly down the hallway. Your zivug is at the end of the hallway. Some hallways are shorter, some hallways are longer, some hallways have hills, some hallways have ups and downs in different situations, but God is directing you to your hallway. And all you need to do is you keep on doing your hishtadlut. Don't start saying, okay, maybe I should have done this, and maybe I should have married this guy. No. You did your hishtadlut, you keep on going. You keep on going, God is directing you. He's closing all the doors, directing you to the person that you need to go and intend to marry. This also works with Parnassah. People try business here. This is not working. God is locking all doors. You know why? Because this is not what you're meant to be. This is not what you're meant to be doing. Close all the doors. You're going to be successful with this business, and God's closing all the doors and directing you to where you need to be. The Zidduch Rebbe gives a mashal, a parable, that there was, one day there was the angel of dreams meets the angel of success. And he goes and says, you have no idea what I did last night. He says, right, last night I went over to Mr. Reich. Mr. Reich, he declared bankruptcy. He lost everything. They took away his furniture, they took away his property, they took everything. He didn't even have a bed to sleep on. And he was finally he fell asleep. And I went over and I gave him this amazing dream. And I gave him this dream that he got a loan and he invested it successfully, and because of that he was able to get money, and then he was able to pay back his loan, and he built himself. By the time, the few minutes into the dream, he was a multimillionaire again. So the angel of success says, that's so cruel. Like, why would you give this person a false hope, this dream? And the angel of the dreams goes over to the angel of success and says, you're the one to talk? He says, what do? You allow a person to be successful their entire life. They go and they make money, and they go on trips, and they do everything. They have, children, everything, whatever it is a person's desires and wants, they get. So the person feels respected. They feel, they think that they're intelligent. They think that they brought this all upon themselves. Gives us a lot of credit. They're on top of the world. And then says the angel of dreams to the angel of success, in a split second, everything goes away. This person dies, and he sees that all of it is false. It's nothing. You have people that go through life with, mazal is just smiling. Everything they do, they're successful, and it's amazing. They should be, but they don't begin. And you look at the flip side. You have people that unfortunately don't have this mazal, and people think that this is successful and this is not successful, and really it's all an illusion, because when the time comes where you see what's real success and what's not success, there's only one thing that counts, and that's your effort. Let's call it hishtadlut, but it's really effort in a broad sense. That's your effort of what you did. The Gemara Pesachim, page 58, goes and says that Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, passed away. And then he came back to life. He had a near-death experience. He went up into the next world and he came back. And they asked him, he says, what did you see in the next world? So he goes, and I saw an upside-down world. I saw the people that were respected in this world, they were held, very low in the next world. The people that were not respected in this world, they were held very high in the next world. And the answer, and that's really, what they answered him? The rabbi answered him, his father answered him, he says that you saw a clear world. You didn't see an upside-down world. That is exactly, you saw the clearest version of that world. Because everything that we crave and what we think as success, that's all an illusion. And you look at, let's say, for example, a parent go and invests an incredible amount of effort on a certain child, And unfortunately, the child did not succeed. It didn't work. The child barely advances, and that, it didn't work. The parent went and learned with him day and night. They tried everything they could, but it wasn't successful. This world, they weren't successful, but in the next world, this parent will be rewarded as if this child was the most successful, right? Why? Because it counts about the effort that this parent did for the child. It doesn't matter about what you succeeded in your life, but it matters how much effort you put into it. So what we need to do is only our hishtadlut. We need to do our effort. After that, it's in God's hand. There was once a young man who wasn't so bright, and when he was learning in the yeshiva, he was only able to learn one pelik of Gemara, pelik Emunah. That's all he was able to learn. So he went over to the Stipler Gun. He went over to him for chizuk. He says, Rabbi, you got to help me. I'm learning for years. All I get is one parak. I can't get anything else. He wasn't smart. He couldn't comprehend it. So the rabbi went and brought him to his bookshelf. And he has a set of books called Kehilot Yaakov. And the rabbi goes to this student and he says, I spent so many years writing these books on the entire Gemara, on the entire Shas. And you should know, the rabbi goes and tells the student that when you open your mouth and you learn Perek Emunah, when you learn this Perek of Gemara, that God gets more pleasure out of you than He gets from 1,000 like me. That's what this is the Gadol Adol, the Stipler Go. This is what he tells this person. It's not about your success. It's about your effort. It's so difficult for you, says the Stipler, and you do it anyway. It doesn't matter how much ground you get covered. You're doing the best that you can, and that's all that God counts. There's nothing else that matters, only what you do, your hishtadlut. But now, when somebody goes and they do their hishtadlut, let's say, or better yet, let's give an example like this. Let's say somebody made a wrong decision. Let's say somebody put themselves in a situation where they did something wrong. What they need to do at this point in time is to try to rectify it, like we said. And if you can't rectify it, that's all, that you have to go and accept it, with Emunah and Bitachon. What happens when you do something bad and you made your own error, and then you go and you try to fix it? You did all your normal hishtadlut that you tried to do, and it didn't work. You weren't able to reverse it. So what happened? That situation all of a sudden can turn into a mitzvah. You could turn it into a mitzvah because you're utilizing your Emunah and Bitachon in God and saying, listen, God at one point wanted this to happen. Rabbi David Asher goes and brings down a story by the name of rabbi by the name of Rabbi Chaim Zaid from Eretz Yisrael. He told an amazing story. He said that this rabbi went and he married off his daughter. And he had a distant cousin by the name of Asher that came to the wedding, and he handed the rabbi an envelope, which is very common. You give a present with some cash. And the rabbi, after the wedding, opens up the envelope and he sees a very impressive sum. He sees 400 shekel inside. For Israel, it's a very high sum. So 2 weeks go by, and this Rabbi Zaid goes and he gets a wedding invitation from his distant cousin Asha, who's also, now marrying off his daughter. So the rabbi's thinking, he says, listen, I gotta go. I'm obviously going to go to the wedding. It's my cousin, but I can't give him 400 shekel back. So you know what? I'm going to give him 500 shekel. So he puts 500 shekel in an envelope, writes along a nice warm, note wishing Mazel Tov, and gives a blessing, and he puts it in his pocket. He goes and he travels to the wedding hall. And as Hashgacha, divine providence has it, he goes into a wrong wedding hall. He goes into this wrong wedding hall, and he sees, right when he walks in, he sees a box and with a little slot on top where you could put in envelopes for. So he goes into the wedding hall. He looks at the box. He sees everyone's putting in their money. He takes out his envelope and he puts it into the box. He walks into this wedding, and he starts looking around. He says, I don't recognize anybody over here. He was marrying his cousins were Temanim. They, the Sfaradi, they're different look. He's like, there's nobody here. Everybody's here light skins. Like, what's going on over here? Until he's looking around, he realized he's at the wrong wedding. He went and he put, money in a wedding that he doesn't know who it is. So he's like, it's an embarrassing situation. He has to get the money out now. So he goes and he starts looking for the father of either the Chatan or the Kala. So he finds the father of the Chatan, and he taps him on the shoulder, and the Chatan's father turns around and he sees Rabbi Zaid, and he looks at him like in shock, and Rabbi Zaid was about to say something, and all of a sudden he's like, Rabbi Zaid, I can't believe you came to my wedding. I can't believe you came to my son's wedding. What an honor, what a zchut, that's unbelievable. Thank you so much. And he realized that he knew this, this particular person. And he's like, of course, I what he's supposed to say? No, I'm here by mistake. He's like, yeah, but, I need to tell you something. The rabbi says, I put an envelope with money in the box at the door. And the father of the Chatan cut him off. He's like, you came and you gave me money? It's like, it's unbelievable. Thank you so much. That's unbelievable. He's so happy. He doesn't even let the rabbi finish. He takes the rabbi, he brings him into the middle, and he starts dancing with him. He brings the Chatan in, and they're all dancing together. The rabbi's thinking, he's like, what am I going to do now? He's like, no, that was a mistake. He's like, he can't go on. He says, give me the money back. So he goes and he leaves. He goes to the right wedding and he writes another check for 500 shekel, and then he puts that also in, gives it to his cousin. The next day, this father of the Chatan, his name was Yosef, he calls the rabbi, and he says, because of what you did, I made peace with somebody that I haven't spoken to in 5 years. And he goes on and explains that he had a friend by the name of Rachamim, and he was struggling financially, and he helped him out. And when Rachamim, his friend, made a wedding for his son, this Yosef, this father of the Chatan, wasn't invited. And he was very insulted. He says, wait a minute, I helped you so much. Where's your karat tov? Where's your, where's your gratitude? You don't invite me? The day after the wedding, Yosef saw his friend Rachamim walking down the street. And what happened? He's walking down, and Rachamim goes and he crosses the other side, deliberately, purposely. He sees him and he crosses the other side. And he's like, and he says, since then, I haven't spoken to my friend. And I said, what type of guy is that? I helped him out. I helped him. Not only does he not invite me to the wedding, but then he sees me, he crosses the street. So I decided, you came to my wedding last night and I didn't invite you. And not only that, you came and you even brought a gift. So I decided, maybe I should have come to his wedding also and not waited for an invitation. So I went and I called, I called my friend Rachamim, and, I said, we want to make up. I forgive you for not inviting me. And he says, wait. He's like, what? He's like, you forgive me? He's like, Rachamim goes, I'm angry at you. And he's like, why are you angry at me? You didn't invite me. He's like, what are you talking about? I didn't invite you to my son. Of course I invited you to the wedding. I sent you the invitation. And they started talking. Turns out that Rachamim actually sent an invitation to Yosef, but it was lost in the mail. And because it was lost in the mail, each thought that the other one was arguing, and they had sort of a spat because of that, and they went into a little bit of a feud. So this is what Yosef is telling this Rabbi Zaid, and he says, Rabbi, I know this is a big schut, a big, it's an et ratzon, it's a time of mercy from heaven. I want to know, please, because you instigated this, can you please give me a blessing? I have a very old, my oldest son is not married. Can you give me a blessing that my oldest son should get married? So, of course, the rabbi says, yes, it is et ratzon, you did something amazing, you made shalom, you made peace, it's a very big bracha, and he gave him a blessing also that the oldest son should get married. A short while later, a few days later, Rabbi Zaid is walking down the street, and all of a sudden he hears a man call his name. He turns around, and who was it? It was none other than Rachamim. It was Yosef's friend. And he goes and he says to him, I want to thank you, Rabbi. He says, my friend Yosef told me on what you did and what instigated him to call and to sort of make peace again. He says, I really want to thank you. It was weighing heavily on my mind, and now we're all good. And he says, Rabbi, because you did so much, can you do me a favor? Can you give me a blessing? He says, I have a daughter that she's getting older and she's not married yet. Can you please give me a blessing that she should get married? And he stops for a second, and all of a sudden the puzzles click. There's a few days go by. He's like, wait a minute. He says, Yosef has an older son that's not married. Rachamim has an older daughter that's not married. He goes and he makes the shidduch, and they end up getting married. And not only they end up getting married, he ends up getting shatchanas geld. He ends up getting shatchan money. And he said that money made up for what he lost plus more. So what do we see over here? We see over here that even when you make a mistake in your life, even when you're making, Rabbi Zaid made a mistake, he wasn't supposed to be there. Even that, there's a heavenly hand guiding you. It was an honest mistake. It wasn't something that he did on purpose. So even when you make a problem, God is overseeing everything. And this leads us to the final point. And the final point is, what about when you do a sin? If you do a sin, can you say that, God wanted you to do a sin? And again, I've spoken about this before, and it's very, very important, to say this again, because unfortunately there are people out there that say that, yes, if you sinned, God wanted you to sin. That is incorrect. God does not want you to sin. Why is that incorrect? Because if you think that God wanted you to sin, so then how do you do tshuva? In order to do tshuva, you have to regret. How can you regret something that's divine orient, or it's divine ordained, comes from heaven? It wasn't my fault. What, am I going to regret something that God did? God wanted me to do this. So people, unfortunately, twist their minds, and they say, you know what, God wanted me to do this sin, and they make it so they end up not doing tshuva. It's a Satan playing, tricks on their head, saying that, yeah, God wanted you to do it. No. God did not want you to do the sin. And if you did and you made the sin, you have to now and do tshuva. And it's very interesting because where does the Rambam speak about the aspect of free will? He speaks about in Hilchot Tshuva. He speaks about it in the laws of repentance. That's where he speaks about free will. So if somebody goes and does something wrong out of their own free will, it's not because God wanted it, it's because you made a mistake. So you have to go and you have to, fix it. You have to do tshuva. So what do we see over here? That if somebody makes a mistake, then we all make mistakes. We're all human. We have to try to fix it. That's step number one. So that either could be physically or you could do tshuva if it was spiritually. If we did everything that we could do, and that's it, there's nothing else that we could, do, then it comes the level of acceptance. This is what God wanted. God orchestrated it, and we accept this with the emunah and bitachon. And you should also know that we're never put in a situation that you can't pass a test. Don't make yourself in a situation that you're going to automatically fail. God doesn't put you in a situation that you can't pass, but you yourself can make yourself worse and worse for you. And the easiest example that I could probably tell you is people that go and they're down. And again, it's very normal for everybody to have down days and to have up days. Very, very normal. But there are certain times where people go and they wallow in their own misery. God, orchestrated, okay, you're going to have a certain, down day. And instead of getting up again, the next day or a few hours later, they keep on wallowing more and more. No, I don't want therapy. No, I don't want to do this. No, I don't want to take medication. No, I don't want to fix it. I want to wallow. So you have to be careful. Is that something that God wanted it to happen, or is it something that you brought upon yourself? So let's try to do a quick recap, and then we'll open up for some questions. So number one is that you bring suffering upon yourself on purpose. On purpose, this you should not do. You shouldn't bring suffering upon yourself. Again, there are certain situation where certain tikkunim, there's certain kapparot that you deal with a rabbi, a competent rabbi, halachic, or normal orthodox rabbi, and they will guide you on how and what to do with certain tikkunim if that should be necessary. But what happens if you do by mistake? So if you do by mistake, the formula is very simple. If you, God forbid, do a mistake, you have to go and try to fix that mistake. If it's not possible to fix it, then you go and you accept it, and this is from God. Obviously, I oversimplified it tremendously. There's a lot of other aspects that are involved in it, and that's when you go and you speak to a rabbi. Say, what should I do in this scenario? But one of the big problems upon why this topic is so important and why this is something that you really have to let it sink in is that people live in their mistakes, especially in their past. People live in their past, and they can't grow if you can't get out of something if you're still in the hole. You can't, if you're not climbing and you're just scraping around the dirt around the hole and just making the hole bigger, you're not going to be able to get out. You have to, in many times in life, you have to go, and the past is the past, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to change who I am. If you go and you define yourself as a bad person, you're not going and changing. You're defining of who you are. We have to go, yes, we may have made a mistake. We have to go and try to fix it, whether it's tshuva, whether it's physically. If we can't, you move on. You move on. It's acceptance. It's from God, and this is what God wanted for you. Whether it's your fault, whether it's not, there's nothing more that you could do. All God wants is you to do your hishtadlut, whether it's before the error or after the error. That's all that you need to do. We didn't answer one question, and that we'll have to leave to next week, because this week and next week is a very closely related topic. And the question was, just so that we'll put your, just so you have an understanding, that at one point it says that everything is from God. We quoted a Gemara from Kulin, page 7b, that you don't even hurt your finger unless you go and it's decreed. Another part, you have to go and so we're going to have to, explain that nuance. We sort of gave a part of an answer, but with Bezat Hashem, we'll give a full answer, Bezat Hashem, next week. And with that, we'll open up with any questions. So let's see the chat. Okay. Can you please repeat the source of the Gemara? So the Gemara in Chulin, page 7b, says that a person doesn't go and hurt their finger below in this world unless it was decreed from up above. Okay. Next question. How do we know at which point our hishtadlut was enough and we should just accept our situation? That's an excellent question. The question is how much hishtadlut do we need to make? That question is, I have a whole part of a series in that, of how much hishtadlut a person needs to do. That is not something that I could answer off, just like the top of the head, but I'll give you, because when people ask questions, I like to at least give a partial answer. So the partial answer is like this. Your hishtadlut has to be consistent across the board. So everybody has hishtadlut is something that is proportional. It depends. If you go and you do a certain amount of hishtadlut for panasa, you should do that similar amount of hishtadlut for dating, the similar hishtadlut for any other business or any other purchase or whatever it is that you make. It has to be across the board. And what I say by hishtadlut is proportional is that everybody has to do a different level of hishtadlut. It depends on your level of emunah. You can't go and start convincing yourself, yeah, I have emunah. My chatan is going to knock on the door and he's going to come in, which really you don't have that. You have to be consistent. You have to be true to your level. So whatever you do hishtadlut and everywhere else, that's where you do hishtadlut across the board. That amount or like area. Again, that's a very brief answer. We really have to go through it in depth. But B'ezrat Hashem, we'll speak about it more in depth when we get to that topic. Okay. Here's another question. Do people with mental illness or personality disorders have bechira? Okay, so that's a very good, bechira is free will. So this is a very, very important question. Do people with issues have free will? So we know that the Gemara classifies someone as, let's say, a shoteh, somebody that's, the mind is not there. The mind is not there. Now, I don't want to give a scientific, terminology because I don't want to pinpoint one, but let's say somebody is not there. Somebody is not there. I get, what that means is at different levels. They're not liable. So you look at somebody that's mentally deficient, like severely. They don't have the free will, and they don't get punished for things that they're doing. There's no free will that they have. However, the personality disorders is a wide range. There are personality disorders. Like think about somebody with multiple personality disorders. So one of him could be tzaddik, another one could be a serial killer. And the tzaddik is trying to make the serial killer machzir b'tshuva. So people, obviously that's not someone in the right mind. So that type of situations, we're not talking about that. The free will is very limited, if any. We're talking about normal, people that have either depression, anxiety, mental illness, that even bipolar in certain scenarios. So there's certain mental, illnesses that you do have free will, and there's certain mental illnesses that, it's beyond, anything. There's very obviously, no free will there, and in that situations they don't get punished for anything. Okay, next question. Okay. I think I've heard from another class of yours that if someone has complete emunah on something, then Hashem makes it happen or not happen based on that individual's emunah and what he is having emunah about. What then is the line of emunah and negligence? So I am not fully understanding that question. If that question means that, let's say somebody, maybe I do understand it. If let's say somebody has complete emunah b'tachon that something is supposed to happen, and I think the example that I mentioned once before was somebody went over to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, can you give me a blessing that I will win the lottery? And the rabbi says, if you really have emunah b'tachon that you will win the lottery, then you'll win the lottery. So he says, fine, he's working on himself, so I'm going to win the lottery, I'm going to win the lottery, I'm going to win the lottery, it's mine, I can see the money already. He goes and he buys the lottery for $20 million. And he goes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, this is the winning ticket, I won the lottery, $20 million. And the rabbi says, you got it? He's like, you know what? When's the drawing? And the guy says the drawing is tomorrow. So the rabbi says, listen, $20 million, I'll tell you what, I'll give you I have some donors, I'll give you $10 million today for that. Would you do it? And the guy's thinking, he's like, $20 million, he's like, you got a deal. Yeah, $10 million today. So the rabbi goes and says, you see, you didn't have emunah. You say that you have emunah, because if you had emunah, who in the right mind will say, yeah, I'll sell my ticket for $20 million for $10 million when I can win $20 million the next day? Really, you were saying it, but you didn't really, feel it. So there is an aspect that where if you go and you really have emunah b'tachon, that will come. That's a high level of emunah that even if, you decide you want a gold watch, somebody will come knocking on your door and give you a gold watch. Then yes, that's a level of emunah that you could have, very, very hard to reach, but it's a level that you could achieve. How do you deal with that in regards to negligence? So this is where I'm not sure where the connection is. But if the connection is that, let's say you wanted to go and, you know what, I'm going to confuse you. What I'm about to say is going to be very confusing. Let's leave it at that. That's what emunah, when I said about having emunah, you can have everything, that's that. When I'm speaking about negligence is that we're not talking about an aspect of you doing something that is, in the line of having emunah. It's just you being negligent. If you're being negligent, it's very different by you having emunah and what you need to do. We could throw a curveball into here and say, oh, you have emunah and your negligence, but let's not get into that because I'm not sure where your question is. Okay. Here's another good question. What's the ratio of hishtadlut to emunah? So again, this is something that we'll have to discuss in our class on hishtadlut, but it's proportional. It depends on each person is different. It depends on your level of emunah. Okay, next question. Do you have any advice for someone who did tshuva on past mistakes and moved on? However, certain reminders pop up every now and then which reminds them of their mistakes. Okay, so if somebody does, there's two aspects to think about over here. When someone does tshuva 1 year, should they do tshuva again the next year? So let's say they did a certain sin in, 2015. Should they, and they did tshuva that Yom Kippur and everything, well, should they still do tshuva the following years? So you look at Rabbi Yehoshua, you look at, a lot of, the discussion of tshuva. It's not a bad thing that you could keep on doing the same tshuva. You could keep on repeating that same tshuva, meaning that you could still have regret for it, obviously. You still confess it to God, and you still vow never to do this again. You still have that aspect of tshuva constantly. Why? Because when you do that, when you're doing that aspect of tshuva constantly, you're not going to do any sin, because it's something that it's in your mind. It's like, it's fresh in your memory. The example that I like to give is, you have a friend of mine, maybe I shouldn't have said as a friend of mine, that drinks tequila, let's say. And actually I have a few friends that drinks tequila. And if that person's going to end up listening to this share, it's not you. It's not who you think. It's somebody else. It really is. He drinks tequila, and then tequila does crazy stuff to him. And then he's like, oh, now I remember why I don't drink tequila anymore. And a few years go by, and he's like, tequila? Yeah, I'll have some tequila. And he drinks it, and then the next day he's like, now I remember why I don't drink tequila anymore. A few years go by, a few months go by, and he says, hey, anybody want tequila? Even though he vowed that he's never going to do tequila again. Why? Because last time he did tequila, he was singing the Macarena, whatever it is, with the people in the corner. He's like, I'm not going to do it anymore. But then you forget. And then you do it again. And then you forget and you do it again. And you forget and you do it again. But if somebody constantly remembers, you know what, tequila is not good for me. Tequila is not good for me. The next time someone says tequila, I'd be like, no. That's not for me. So when someone does tshuva constantly, even from past sins, it's very beneficial. Because the next time that, God forbid, that happens, they'll be like, no, not for me. I remember what I went through. However, there's also a fine line where somebody goes and they can't move on. Brings them to a point of depression. It brings them to a point they can't move on. That's something that you should really speak to a rabbi and how to go and move on for that, because not always is it healthy to always live in your past sins if it's going to bring you down and you're not going to be able to grow from it. Sometimes it's good to forget about it and move on, as long as you did the proper tshuva. And other times it's beneficial to go and to be able to constantly have that in your mind so that you won't fall again. Okay, next question. Is too much hishtadlut a lack of emunah? So again, that depends on your proportion and where you stand. So these are a lot of questions that are all based on hishtadlut. So B'ezrat Hashem, we'll have to speak about it when we get to that. Okay, next we have two questions in one. Almost everyone I know with mental illness, it's not their fault. I have found a few, but not most. So I don't think most of them can be held accountable. That's question number one. Next question is, you say someone can cause something bad to happen to them, but what about the people who are careless? Okay, so let's go one question at a time. So yes, I've dealt with people with mental, illnesses and things like that. And I would also say that the majority that I dealt with them were not their fault, but that's just, I don't know what, volume, you can make an actual, statistic about. But what Rabbi Victor Miller was explaining when he said that even those can cause it, that yes, they have a baseline of a mental illness. That's them, that's from God. But the fact that they could make it worse, that could be on them, depending on the level of was the creed and what was not. So yes, there is sometimes a chemical imbalance. We can't talk about chemical imbalance. There's certain things that are out of control. But there's certain scenarios that even when you have mental illness, and it is from God, you could take that and bring it to a lower level and make it worse. And you could bring it to a higher level and fix it. So there is a level, even in that you have free will, that you have the ability to fix, and you have the ability, unfortunately, not to fix. The next question that was asked, I'm not following it, that if somebody causes something bad to happen, and then there's this carelessness, it could be the same. Something, it could be on purpose, and carelessness is by mistake. If I'm not, maybe I'm not getting the question, so feel free to rewrite that and elaborate a little bit more. Okay, next question. I lost my spot over here. Oh, if someone has Emunah that he won't get, okay, I don't think that was a question. Next. If someone tries to do harm, but the bad thing still doesn't happen, what determines that? Okay, so that's a very good question. So you have people, and I don't want to take us down a wrong path, who attempted suicide, let's say, and they weren't successful. So what does that mean? That is a long discussion on, let's say you are negligent. Let's say you jumped out of an airplane with an umbrella, and somehow there was a wind, and the wind took you and guided you. In those situations, when you put yourself in a dangerous situation and you get saved out of that, you unfortunately lose your merits. You lose schutim. You lose your schusim that you have built up. God says, okay, I'm going to save you, but it's going to cost you. Spiritually, it's going to cost you from your merits. Okay, next. When was your emunah tested, and how did you overcome your challenge? I think that's basically a general question that I guess everybody could think about in themselves. Okay, next one. I understand that someone with mental illness may not be responsible for having it, but are they held accountable for their actions if they hurt other people physically, verbally, or not? So that's a very broad question. If somebody has a mental illness and then they cause problems to other people, are they held responsible for that? So it depends if if it was on purpose, if it was not. If you're dealing with somebody with severe mental deficiencies and they can't, think for themselves, they can't talk to themselves, and they accidentally hit somebody, obviously they're not held accountable. But if somebody, put themselves in a situation and they made themselves in a bad situation and then they hurt other people, then obviously they're held accountable. But again, this is something that only God could go and answer, and God goes and judges everybody accordingly. Okay, there was, I think, one final question where I didn't, if there's any other questions, please, here we have, okay, another question, slightly off topic, but how does Emunah relate to these corona times? Meaning, is one allowed to go public areas such as simcha, school, etc.? So, the straightforward answer is you got to follow the medical professionals and, the government of what they say to do. I know there's a ton of conspiracies going around, and it's really the 5G. I don't even want to get started with this. I'm going to get really angry, and not for probably the reasons that you think. It's really China, it's really USA, it's really Israel, whatever it is causing these problems. And what should you do? You should follow the guidelines. You should follow the guidelines by the healthcare professionals. You should follow the guidelines of the rabbis. So if they open up schools, then, and you feel like it's okay for you to go to school, then you should go to school. Obviously, some people are more sensitive, have a weaker immune system, and are more prone to more problems. Then obviously speak to your doctor to make sure that it's okay. Because sometimes they'll open up for the general public, but let's say for certain people they say, no, you know what? For you, it's better that you still stay, and you shouldn't do that. So you have to follow medical advice. You have to, follow the guidelines of what the government says and follow the guidelines of what your doctor says. And that goes for going to simchas and going to school, going to minyanim, going to all these things. You have to follow the following, the guidelines. And if something happens, then you did what you need to do. That's your hishtadlut that you need to do. Next question, is there a framework for what to do when medical people are not being smart? Yes, find other medical people that are smart. For an example would be that the Surgeon General said no mask. That's a good thing. That's why, I was thinking if I should say that follow the government, because the government doesn't know what they're talking about, or they have an agenda behind it. Don't wear masks because we need the mask. Okay, now wear the mask, it's gonna help. Okay, now don't wear the mask, but only wear this type of mask and don't wear that type of mask. So yeah, there's a lot of craziness going around now. And I don't think there's one right answer, for it. You have to be smart. And, if you were to ask me, yes, you should be wearing masks. Is there a way that masks can make you sicker? I don't think so. But maybe technically, the germs can get stuck over there and you're constantly inhaling it. Again, there's always something, but generally that's what you need to do. And if you did what you need to do and you still got it, then that's from that is from God. That's their hishtadlut. Next question is, so why is there mental illness? What was God's purpose? I never wish on anybody, especially affects Emunah. So that's a very good question. What is the purpose of mental illness? So it's really a question of why is there purpose of anything, of any suffering, of any problems, better yet. So when you look at, let's say, people, let's say that came out that are severe mental deficiencies, and they come into this world, like, why are they here if there's no free will? Why is they here if there's nothing that, they can gain from it? And it's only God's calculation, but there's a reason why they're put in this world without having the capabilities of having all their full, faculties working to the maximum capacity that everybody else, does have. And many times it's because they are much righteous souls, and they don't need, meaning that the reason why we're here now is that we have something to fix. We have something that we need to do. So you have righteous souls that have very little things to do. So if they have very little things to do, God puts them in this world in a sense that they are, they have mental deficiencies that they can't control certain things, and they're not held responsible for those things. So they're not gonna get punished for it. They only need to be a certain, let's think about people with, let's say, for example, Down syndrome. Down syndrome, they don't have free will. They don't have, at least for the majority of the part, they don't have so much of say. So what is their purpose? And there's a reason why they did it. Generally speaking, there are big rabbis, gedolim, that when somebody like that walked into the room, they stood up. Why? Because that's a holy soul. That's a holy soul that only has very little left to fix. Now, we don't know what, when, where, and how. We're not God's accountant, and we don't know, but God did it for a reason, and there's a purpose. And just like every single one of us has their own issues that we go through, whether it's mental issues, whether it's physical issues, whether it's financial issues, whether it's marriage issues, whether it's dating issues, whether it's children, whatever it is, we have a set of problems that God gave to every single one of us. And because of that, we have to deal with it. We have to try to get out of it. We should. You have marriage issues, you should try to therapy. You should try to speak to somebody. You have dating issues, try to speak to somebody. You have medical issues, you should go to the doctor. So there is things that you should do. After that, you should know that everything is from God. Okay, it seems like one final question. Do people with mental illness have a zivug? Depends how severely. It's possible, yes, and it's possible not. Not everybody comes to this world with a zivug, but the majority of people do. So if you're talking about severe mental illness, and if there's no chance of them ever getting married, it's still possible that they have a zivug over here, but their purpose was never to get married. But in general, people have come down with their zivug. And I'm not talking about severe mental illness where you have absolutely no free will. In general, you come down with the zivug, and you come down with the ability to cope with it and ability to overcome it to some extent. But again, I'm not God's accountant. Only God knows. Only God has the calculations. All we need to do is, instead of trying to be God's accountant and figuring out what, when, where, and how, we have to do what we need to do. And after that, we accept it, and we thank God for the problems that He gave us. Okay.